Dylan Thomas, 1914 to 1953. He was born on 24th October 1914 in Swansea, Wales. His father, DJ Thomas, was teacher at the local grammar school. Dylan studied here and left school in 1931. Swansea fascinated him greatly in his boyhood. He has recorded the thrills of his boyhood in his semi-autobiographical short stories, Portrait of the Artist as a Young Dog, and in his broadcast talks quite early one morning. After leaving school, he worked for a year as a reporter on a Swansea newspaper. Then he went to London, where he did minor jobs for newspapers such as writing reviews for thrillers. He tried to get enlisted in the armed forces during the Second World War, but was rejected as medically unfit. Then he became scriptwriter and announcer in the BBC. He earned great reputation as a marvelous reciter of poetry on the radio or on gramophone records. But in private life, he was earning the displeasure of his friends by drinking too much. In 1937, he married and moved to Legon. He toured America 3 times and delighted huge audiences with his recitation. He passed away while in America in the course of his 3rd tour. His published works include 18 poems 1934, 25 poems 1936 and collected poems 1952, besides his short stories and broadcast talks. Dylan Thomas was perhaps the most powerful among the post-1940 poets of English. He turned away from the political and social preoccupations of the poetry of the 1930s, represented by W. H. Auden and others. He led the Surrealist poets of the 1940s. Edith Sitwell, George Barker, David Gascon were prominent in this group. Surrealist poetry has been described as a perpetual flow of irrational thoughts in the form of images. Dylan Thomas does not go to the extremes of Surrealism, but is restrained in his choice of images. He says, he allows an image to be made emotionally in him and then brings to bear upon it his intellectual and critical faculties. Then he lets it, the firm image, breed another, and that in turn breed another, and so on. Surrealism was a reaction from the over-intellectuality of the previous era. Another movement in which Dylan participated was the Neoromanticism of the 1940s, which laid greater emphasis on emotion and imagination than on the intellect. Still another movement which took shape in the late 40s was the New Apocalyptic movement. These poets denounced the over-intellectuality and the social interest of the poetry of the 1930s. They aimed at making poetry broad, deep, and limitless as life itself. This movement can be described as a continuation of the Surrealist movement, but Dylan is said to have disowned it as a literary school, though some people say that it was he who fathered the movement. E. L. Black, in his work 9 Modern Poets, says that Dylan's poetry can be divided into 3 classes. First, those that are almost surrealist. Second, a few poems that are straightforward. And third, those that present nostalgic memories of childhood. The range of subjects explored by Dylan was limited. Chief among them were sex, death, and religion. The major influences on Dylan Thomas were Hopkins and Freud, and in his later poetry, the Bible's influence also is clearly visible. An interesting aspect of Dylan Thomas's poetry is what is known as synaesthesia, presenting a sense image in terms of another sensation. Example, sight in terms of sound, sound in terms of touch or smell, etc. This is a direct outcome of his unified sensibility, which in turn can be attributed to his unified view of reality as something transcending name and form and pervading everything. He is said to have been obsessed with the thoughts of death, but it should be realized that it is not a flinching from death as something terrible. On the other hand, he equates death with birth. One thing dies when another is born. The birth does not take place after the death. The two things are simultaneous. It is not a linear string of events, but everything happening together. This worldview also brings him near to the Heraclitian Flex, the pantheism of Wordsworth and Shelley, and the Indian doctrine of Advaita, a nameless, formless entity manifesting itself in manifold forms and names. He explored the depths of the unconscious mind for images. He explored the nature of reality and found its oneness. He explored time and found it creator and destroyer, and he explored the possibilities of language to communicate what he has apprehended. This preoccupation with the possibilities of language is inevitable when what is apprehended is subtle and tenuous. We see the same predicament in Eliot's four quartets. The characteristic qualities of his poetry: he was deeply passionate, verbal excitement of his early poetry, the magic of words; wild Neoromanticism challenging the cerebral orderliness of the times; breathless and daring imagery, skulls, maggots, wombs, ghosts, etc. Mingling of biblical and Freudian imagery; mingling of the elemental world of nature in the raw with the feverish internal world of human desires, secrets, longings and regrets. Compound adjectives, for example, sea-sucked, man-melted, tied-tongued. Great liberation of verbal imagery, but the poems are constructed with enormous care. The images are carefully related to each other and to the unfolding meaning. Clearly conceived themes, relation between man and nature, problem of identity in view of the perpetual changes brought about by time, relation of the living to the dead and of both to seasonal changes in nature, unity of all life and of life and death as a continual process, ritual and sacramental elements. Thank you.